All right. Well, welcome once again, guys. It's hard to believe we're almost into week 5, I think now. So again, time flies, right? Speaking of flying, has anybody ever tried this before? Anybody tried any skydiving?
No, but
Nobody.
I really want to.
You really want to, Stephanie?
Yeah,
Are you not scared of heights? Are you worried
not
about?
really, no.
Not really. Okay.
Mm-mm.
I
Okay.
wouldn't
Well,
want to though.
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I am the exact opposite. I do not want to try it.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds a little scary to me, but then again, I kind of have my problem is motion sickness, so I might get sick
Oh,
while I'm in the air. So, all right, well,
okay.
Stephanie, if you do it, make sure you video it and share it with us,
Oh, for
okay?
sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, of course, the reason I mentioned skydiving is because it's going to connect to our first activity, which is thinking about things that we want to try before we die. So that's going to be our expression of the day. So we're actually going to jump into the expression because I want to spend most of our time talking about our topic, kind of connecting to last week, which is looking at collocations. So that's what we're going to be doing here for the majority of our time. But let's go ahead and jump into our expression of the day. So I'm sure some of you have probably heard of this expression before. So if you want to say it with me, it's the bucket list. The bucket list. So maybe you've heard of this before. In fact, there was a movie, I think, with this name. But basically, the bucket list is a list of things you want to do before you die. Now, there seems to be some disagreement, perhaps, as to where the meaning comes from. If you notice at the bottom of the screen, uh, it comes from the expression or the idiom kick the bucket, which is kind of an expression meaning before we die. So when you kick the bucket when you die. Now, of course, there are many possible explanations for this. Some of them are a little sad and depressing. So if you want to find out more, you can go to Google. But one of the possible meanings is when someone dies, maybe they take a bucket of water and wash your feet. And of course, sometimes if you're still kind of dead, your feet may move and kick the bucket. So I don't know. I couldn't find one particular answer. But still, we've tried to use the word bucket list kind of more in a positive way now to think about things we want to do before we go, before we die. So, guys, that's going to be our question of the day. You can use the chat box real quickly, or you can use the microphone, but maybe the chat box would be a little better. So, guys, what activities are on your bucket list? So, Stephanie says she wants to go skydiving, right? But what are some other things you guys want to do? So you can list them in the chat box there. You can use your microphone. What are some things that are on your bucket list? Things you want to do before you die. All right. So once again, the bucket list. That's what we're talking about here, just real quickly. So again, it comes from the idiom "kick the bucket," and like I said, it's basically a way to take something negative and then try to turn it into a positive. And I think, especially thinking about our situation right now, we're probably thinking about the things we want to do now. Since we can't do them. So hopefully you get a chance to do some of these things. Okay, now everybody, like I said at the beginning, you might need paper and pencil, maybe not, but you might want to have it just in case. Because I want to spend the majority of our time kind of talking about our activity from last week. So if you were not here last week, we're just going to do a quick little review. And in fact, we're going to use the poll feature. So again, you might remember the poll feature is where you just answer a few questions. So it'll just take a few minutes. This poll is very short, so I think you'll be able to finish it in just a couple of minutes. So that's going to be our first thing, is reviewing what we talked about last week. So in just a moment, I'm going to open the poll, and then we're going to discuss the answers. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the sharing feature for just a moment, and I'm going to load the poll. And again, so let's go ahead now and jump into what our homework activity was for today. And if you noticed, first off, I did not assign a grade to the activity. So basically the idea was I just wanted you to try it, but we're actually going to go through the activity here together and along the way talk a little bit more about how we think about words going together. Okay, so again, in just a moment, I'm going to share the questions on the screen. And part of the idea is I'm going to get you guys to help me. So I'm not going to do all the talking here. You guys are going to help me out. And then towards the end of the activity, we might need some paper to help us with an exercise. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up on the screen now. Okay. All right, so what I've done is I've taken the 9 sentences from the activity and I've put them in this little presentation. Now I'm going to use number 1 as kind of our example. So once again, from the activity, what I did was I took a word in the context, and the goal here for your activity was for you to identify which words do you think are working together with the particular capitalized word. So for example, I took the first one, hinged. Okay, so I'm going to read the sentence real quickly. But the fight to secure women that right to vote was decades long, and the final step toward ratification hinged on the decision of one young man in Tennessee, State Representative Harry T. Byrne. Now, the word hinged itself is highlighted already, so I'm not going to necessarily highlight it again, but I have already demonstrated which words are working with the word hinged. And especially, so again, I've kind of started with a kind of just a general idea. The step, the final step, hinged on the decision. So first thing I want you to notice is that hinged and on. So I'm going to use a different color here. Some of you may have already recognized that this would probably be an example of what we would call an idiom or a phrasal verb. So the idea here, hinged on, it would actually be thought of as working together directly as an idiomatic expression. In fact, if you looked in the dictionary, you would probably see in the list in the dictionary that hinged and hinged on would be considered like its own sort of separate meaning here. Okay, now notice the words I highlighted, step and decision. So notice I didn't circle all of the other words in the sentence. Now, the reason I didn't is because we have to think of how collocations work. So, for example, I'm going to bring back a different color this time. For example, we have lots of different collocations going on. For example, final step, that would be considered a collocation. And then, of course, the step toward ratification. These particular words are working together, but these words are describing the word step, right? So in this case, they're not working directly with hinged on. They're working with the word step. So that's why I identify that step is the word, is kind of the collocation. So again, we're going to talk more about number 1 here in just a moment and do some examples. But that's what I want us to think about as we're looking through these situations. So please be careful. We need to look before and we need to look after the word. But sometimes the collocation itself may not be just the word that follows. For example, when I look at hinged on, notice the word the. The is not working with hinged on. The is working with the word decision. So the decision, that would be, again, an example of kind of a grammatical, sort of group or pair. So in this case, decision is still the word that's working directly, but the, of course, is describing the word decision. Now, we're not going to get that specific here in this activity, but I am going to ask you guys to help me out here. Okay, so this is the first example. This is the one I wanted to show. I'm going to go ahead now and move on to number 2. Now, the idea is I'm going to ask some people to read and then see if you can tell us what words you think are working together. So, Tassi, I'm going to start with you for number 2. Could you read number 2 for us?
Okay. Long after the Seneca Falls Convention launched the women's suffrage movement in 1848, after suffragists had marched, picked the White House, staged hunger strikes, and endured force feeding in prison. Finally, in August of 1920, their dream was in sight.
Okay, so notice we chose the word launched. Okay, so Tassi, what words do you think are collocating with the word launched? So let's look before.
Convention.
Okay.
The women's suffrage movement.
Okay, and then, so specifically the movement.
Yeah.
Okay, and then of course women's and suffrage are describing the word
The
movement. Okay, excellent. Okay, so if we had to just kind of isolate something like some event, right? The convention launched a movement. Okay, so if we have to think about that group and the idea, an event launched a movement. Okay. All right, so that's kind of our first idea. All right, thank you, Tasi. We're going to come back to this in a moment. Okay. All right, let's move on to number 3. So let's see, Fatima, would you like to read number 3 for us?
Long after the Seneca Falls Convention launched the women's suffrage movements in 1848, after suffragists had marched, picked the White House, staged hunger strikes, and endured force feeding in present finally in August of 1920, their dream was in sight.
Okay, so it's the same text, but now we have the word marched. So Fatima, help us out. Which words are co-locating with marched?
Suffragists.
Okay,
Suffragists.
good. Okay, anything after?
Okay. Dreams.
Okay, that's a good guess, but I want you to notice something. Who can help us with this one? Who can help us with this? Let's see if someone can help us. Anybody have a guess after the word? Is there anything?
White House?
Good
The White
guess.
House?
Good guess, but not exactly. I'll give you a hint. There's a punctuation mark here. Anybody see the punctuation? Anybody? I heard something.
After? No?
Punctuation.
So, maybe it's force feeding.
Good guess, but no. So Fatima, here's the situation. What do you see immediately after the word marched?
Pick.
What is that?
Picket.
Comma.
It's a comma. Yeah. So what does the comma tell you, Fatima?
That means the sentence is done.
Well, you're close. It means that
Yeah.
there's nothing after that idea. Now, Risa mentioned maybe the White House, and Risa, that would be possible if we had the word to. We march to a place. But if you notice, that is not mentioned in the text. So in this case, we really only have a collocation before the word marched. In this case, it's suffragists. That's it. So really, we only have a collocation before. Okay. Now, in thinking about that, so obviously, if we looked at the other words in the sentence, for example, picketed, right? If we chose picketed, that would be they picketed something specific. It would follow them, right? Now, for example, for picketed, let's look at picketed for a moment. I think picketed has 2 collocations here. Can someone help us with this one? What do you think, Rena?
Suffragists and
So
the
suffragists
White
would be
House.
before, and then White House would be after. Congratulations. Yeah, so this would be kind of one of those grammatical ideas. Remember how we use commas sometimes? And each one is being used by the same person. So if we notice, suffragists marched. Suffragists had picketed. Suffragists had staged. And suffragists had endured. So again, if we notice, that's the subject, right, of each of these. Okay, now we'll come back to the sentence in just a moment. But in this case, we notice that the word marched, really the only collocation we find is before it. And then, of course, we have a grammatical relationship, had marched. So obviously these two are working together too. This is grammatical. But in this case, it's more of a verb form and tense. Okay. All right. So Fatima, thank you for that. All right. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. So we've already talked about these words: endured, right? Picketed, staged. So again, endured, we said would be suffragists, right? Would be with endured. Okay. Now, who could help us with after the word endured? Who could help us with that one?
Force feeding.
Yeah, now force feeding would be the co-location. So they endured forced feeding. Now, let's talk about this one for just a moment. Does anybody know what the word endure means? What does it mean to endure? Anybody know? Any guesses?
Like a stand or a
Yeah, yeah, you're very close. Basically, it's sort of like to suffer, to persist. So it's kind of like stand. Yeah. Now stand might be not as strong necessarily, but you're correct, Risa. That would be kind of the basic idea. So when we endure something, we kind of suffer. We kind of persist in something, which means it's a difficult situation. So that's what I want us to think about here. These suffragists. Now that we've looked at all three examples here, so guys, what can we say as we're learning about the co-locations? What can we say about the suffragists at this time? So, for example, was this an easy thing for suffragists? Was this an easy time?
Oh, it's very hard.
No. Yeah, I mean, think about this. When we fight for something, when we fight for our rights, it's not easy, right? They're not just going to give you.
Maybe it was a hard time.
Yeah, I mean, look at the things they did. I mean, they marched, which, let's be honest, we don't march every day. They go to the White House and picket, you know, so maybe you've seen video of people going to the White House carrying signs, you know. Hunger strikes. What's a hunger strike? Who can tell us what a hunger strike is?
Not eating
Yes, not
for a
eating
long time.
for a long time. Yeah, and it's on purpose too. So people are choosing not to eat. So that's again, that's pretty serious when people do hunger strikes. And then of course, notice the last part. They suffered forced feeding. So in other words, when they wanted to protest with hunger strikes, they forced them to eat food. Again, these are not easy things. So that's what I want us to think about. Now we can see how the co-locations are helping us understand more about their situation. So in this case, when we endure things, we endure difficult times, right? We endure difficult things. Now you might say, Mr. John, I'm enduring English. Okay, well, maybe English is tough. But the truth is, maybe it's not so bad, right? But I know, for example, maybe in school, was there a subject in school that you just hated, that you were terrible at, or that you felt like, oh, this is just so boring and I suffered? Maybe you endured a class. What subject in school did you endure?
I was endured by the airstrike.
So you endured, say it again, Fatima?
The airstrike?
History? Okay.
Yeah.
So you endured history class. Okay.
Actually, I hate them because in Morocco. We like in first grade I mean in when you start the first class in the high school,
Mm-hmm.
you have to choose to be like to take the science major or the literacy. So I'm science, so and
Okay.
we take just one hour. I think 1 hour or 2 hours a week, and it's hard for me. Sometimes
Okay. Listen, some subjects, I mean, some students feel like some subjects are just, yeah, terrible, just terrible. Okay, well, who else? Who else has a subject that they had to endure in school? Anybody? Everybody just loves school, no problems? Nobody?
In math,
So math class.
yes.
Wait a minute, don't you work with computers, Brenda?
I work with computers and a lot math. Engineers work with a lot math.
Wait a minute, so did you choose the right career?
Yes, I'm sure like career. I think it's more, you focus more because it's not your skill. You work more in my case in math.
So did you get better? Did you feel like you worked hard and improved
Yeah.
in math? Okay. Okay, well that's good. I mean, that's good. Okay, the math class, that's a good example. All right. Anybody else endure? Any other subjects in school? Well, I'll put my answer. So I endured chemistry class. So I did not I did not like chemistry. So I endured chemistry. So in this case, yeah, I understand. Chemistry was not my favorite, not my favorite topic. Now, of course, again, we can endure many things. So people often endure very difficult times. And again, I think about around the world right now, lots of people are enduring terrible situations. You know, out in California and places like that, there are, you know, wildfires, hurricanes happening in Louisiana. In some countries, you know, right now the situations are terrible. So those people are enduring, they're suffering. But notice they're also persisting. So in some ways, when we endure something, it does mean that it's going to be difficult, but we can survive. So in this case, everyone here, we hopefully survived all of these classes. So let's make sure we add that last part. We suffer, we persist, but we do survive those things. So here, even the women here who fought for their rights, they survived, but it was not easy. So when we endure, we keep going. So hopefully we're enduring right now during this difficult, you know, quarantine sort of pandemic situation. All right, well, guys, let's continue. All right, Saba, would you like to read the next one for us?
Okay, suffragists knew that other states weren't going to budge on ratification. Explains ways. What's more, they knew opposition in the South was fierce. Opponents used racism and the fear of Black women's empowerment to stoke resistance.
Okay, very good. So Saba, what do you think? So the word is fierce. So what words do you think are co-locating with the word fierce?
I think oppositions.
Very good. Okay.
And after opponents.
Okay, now Saba, again, I think there's some punctuation here we need to notice.
Oh, yeah.
What punctuation do you see?
This is a full stop.
Yeah. So or no, wait a minute. That's British English.
It means.
What do we call this in American English?
Dot.
No, that's for websites. Who can tell us what this is in American English?
Period.
Period, yes.
Yes, period.
Yeah, now again, in British English, you might say full stop.
Yeah, full stop.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so in British English, they might say full stop.
Yeah.
And of course, when we talk about the internet, yes, we use dot. But yes, in American English, we call it a period. So again, Saba, I think in this case, this is probably where the collocation finishes. So the opposition was fierce. Now, of course, we can think about what opposition are they talking about. So Saba, what do you think? What do they mean by opposition? What does that mean, opposition?
The people who are against.
Exactly. So in this case, if we had to guess, who is the opposition? Is it the suffragists or is it somebody else?
Else.
So who would it be? You said it just a moment ago.
Liquor lobby.
Yeah, the opponents, right? So you mentioned that opponents in this case. So in this case, Saba, opponents is not necessarily collocating directly with the word fierce, but it is representing who the opposition is. So in this case, opposition and opponents are connected. But again, fierce in this case, opposition. Now, that's a very, very common collocation, fierce opposition. So let me see if I can make this a little smaller. Okay. Now, everyone, again, let's talk about this one just for a moment. So again, what does fierce mean? What does that mean, fierce opposition?
I think it to make something with all your force, all your.
Okay. Yeah. So Carlos mentioned hard, strong. Yeah, with lots of force. Yeah. So that's it. Absolutely. Okay. So for example, you had the lobbyists who were opposed, who had fierce opposition to the suffragists. Now let's think about. Let's think again when we think about using this expression. So guys, anybody can share an example here. What are other sort of situations where you have these sort of opposite parties, these opposite groups who have fierce opposition to each other? Can somebody think of another example? You can use chat box, you can use your microphone. What do you think? Okay, aha, Carlos mentions politics. So Carlos, in Mexico, what would be the opposition? What would be the fierce opposition to each other?
In these days, we don't have a fierce opposition. They are divided, and well, nobody is strong enough to be a big opposition.
Well, so in this case, you think there are too many divisions.
Yeah.
But you don't think they're really fighting with each other, though? Nobody's really fighting?
Yes, of course, they are fighting the small, the
Okay.
small groups against the government.
Okay, well, okay.
So there are 3 or 4 small groups, no one big one or
I
one
see.
enough strong.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, so, but of course they could be strong. I mean, so fierce could be a strong opposition, but I understand what you're saying. Okay. All right, so politics is always a good example. Does anybody else have another one? Of groups who are fiercely opposed to each other? Okay. Yeah. So, for example, Brenda, we often think about religious groups. Now, we're not going to get into religious discussions today, but yeah, often people from different religious backgrounds have fierce opposition to each other, or even opposition to certain situations in society. So, for example, we think about, guns. People often are either in favor or have fierce opposition to guns. So, in this case, yeah, these are not just little things. Yeah, so for example, you might say, Mr. John, I hate cheese, right? So for example, if I put it in the chat box, if you said, I hate cheese, for example, you don't say, I have fierce opposition to cheese, right? Would you say that? Would that make sense? Would that be a good collocation, to have fierce opposition to cheese? Maybe not. Now, can you guys remember? I do have fierce opposition to one food. Do you guys know which food it is? Broccoli. So yeah, so in this case, I think that's a perfect example. I have fierce opposition to broccoli. Okay, well, anyway, I'm just kidding. What's that?
Brussels?
And Brussels sprouts. That's correct. Yes,
Yeah.
two things that I hate. So you guys remembered. Good. Now, maybe your kids have the same opinion. Kids have fierce opposition to vegetables, so maybe that's it. I don't know. Some kids like it. I don't know. Okay. Well, so again, here we go. We're thinking about how we can take a collocation, we identify it from the context, and now we think about how we can use it. All right, excellent. All right, let's keep going because, again, our time is starting to get away from us a little bit. So let's see. Risa, would you like to read number 6 for us?
Their positions were made clear by the floral display on their lapels. Lapels.
Mhm.
When a woman convinced a legislator to join their side, they would pin a rose to his jacket. Those for women's suffrage wore a yellow rose, while these against spotted red American Beauty. It's often called the War of the Roses, let's say.
Okay. All right. So Risa, help us out. What do you think? So the word is convinced. Which words do you think are collocating with convinced?
Women.
Okay. So women. Okay. What about after?
legislator
Okay. Is that it?
to join their side.
Aha, yeah, I wanted to, and I'll stop it to join for just a moment. Now, of course, their side is part of it. So we'll kind of draw an arrow. But what I want us to think about is, let's look at the sentence again. So a woman convinced somebody to do something. Someone convinced someone to do something. So in this sentence, we convinced somebody to join our side. So now Risa, without discussing the article too much, what do you think the woman did, maybe, to convince this person to join her side? What do you think she may have said? What do you think she may have done?
They were holding.
Okay. That's true. They were kind of stopping some of the legislation. Okay. Carlos mentioned maybe they explained their purpose to them. Maybe they explained why it's important for women to vote. Do you think maybe they did that? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you want to convince somebody, so Risa, let's think about your children for just a moment. When you want to convince them to, eat the food on their plate, or what do you say to them? How do you try to convince them to do something?
Maybe they try to explain why they need to do.
Yeah. And what do you say?
We discussed this morning actually.
So this is real life for Risa here. Okay.
So I said no, not now. After
Okay.
the lunch.
Did you say, for example, no iPad or no video game?
Yeah, like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. So we've got other parents here in the class. Do you convince your children the same way? No iPad, no video games, right?
Every
Come
single
on.
day I do that.
Every single day. Okay.
Yeah.
I like Fatima's answer. Fatima in the chat box tries to be like the good parent here. You'll be a strong boy if you eat your vegetables. Yeah, that didn't work on me, Fatima. Some of you might know the character Popeye. Do you know Popeye, the sailor man?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Popeye ate spinach, right? So he would eat spinach and get strong. So my mom would say, if you eat spinach, you'll be like Popeye. And I thought, I don't want to be like Popeye. That's not important. So in this case, that didn't work on me. Sorry, Fatima.
Actually, for me, I try like to be a old parents because now I'm not giving my son like the iPad, even
Okay.
the phone. So I try like to focus with something else.
Okay. You try to use positive reinforcement here, I see.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Some of you may remember, I told this story once in class. My mom wanted me to eat those Brussels sprouts on the plate. And I told her, no, I am not going to eat these. And she said, you're going to sit here all night until you eat those Brussels sprouts. So guys, do you remember what happened? Do you remember the end of the story?
Stayed there all night
I
long.
stayed there all day. And then my mom finally gave up. She took the plate. She said, fine. And then she threw it away. I won.
I did last night.
You did it last night. Oh, and did it work?
Didn't work.
Didn't work. Yeah. But guys, you should know me by now. I'm stubborn. Okay. I got a hard head. So in this case, my mom did not convince me. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You don't give up. Yeah.
I don't give up. No, I hated Brussels sprouts. I still do. I think they're disgusting. So anyway, well, we convince people to do lots of things. But I think in this case, that's what we need to think about. We convince people who don't want to do something. So now we understand. Oh, now we see the opposition, that fierce opposition. Now we understand it. Okay. All right, guys, I think we have time maybe to do one more example. So let's see, who has not had a chance here? Mie, would you like to read this one for us? Mie, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you read number 7 for us?
Yes. Fatburn was a widow running the family farm. She was college educated, a
Voracious.
voracious newspaper reader, and a strong supporter of women's suffrage.
Okay, so voracious is the word. So which words do you think are co-locating with voracious?
Strong supporter?
That might be a little too far away.
Mm-mm.
Well, for example, let's look before the word. I do see a punctuation mark. Do you see it?
Yeah.
What is it?
Education.
No, no. What do you see there? What punctuation mark am I circling?
Comma.
Yeah, it's a comma. Yeah, so in this case, it's not going to be co-locating necessarily with these words. So, for example, who is the voracious so-and-so?
She.
She.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then she, of course, is Feb Burns. So in this case, again, remember, it's working together, but it's not always absolutely next to the word. So she was, so we can describe people with this kind of word. All right, and then after that, Mie, what comes after voracious?
Newspaper.
She's a voracious newspaper? Are you sure she's a newspaper?
No. Reader.
She's a reader. There we go. Okay, now, Mie, do we know what voracious means? Or can you guess?
I don't know.
Well, let's see. Let's look at the context. She was educated. She's college educated. Now, here's a question for anybody. Do you think women at this time were educated? Anybody? What do you think? Do you think that women were commonly educated at this time?
No.
No.
Yeah, this is the 1800s. So women didn't have as many opportunities as they do today. So in this case, the fact that she's college educated is telling us that she has some special, some special skill or some special position. So in this case, if you're a voracious reader, what do you think that might be? Anybody?
Like to do this a lot.
Yes, a lot.
She can read 4 books a week.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Basically, in fact, guys, voracious basically means like to do something a lot. Like, so in this case, if you're voracious in something, you don't have, you want to do it a lot. So yeah, in this case, when you're a voracious reader, it's kind of similar to the word fierce. Very strong. Very strong. And in fact, something you do a lot. Now, if you notice, it's describing the word reader. She's a voracious reader. Now, I'm curious, here in the group, anybody a voracious reader? Do we like to read lots of books or magazines or newspapers? Doesn't have to be in English.
No.
No. Okay, Risa says absolutely not. Okay.
I am.
Okay, good. All right. Anybody else a voracious reader? Carlos said sadly no. Okay, Carlos, remember all that free time you talked about on Monday? You've got time to read now, right?
I think now everyone is voracious in Facebook.
Voracious says, yeah, let's put a voracious social media user.
Yeah.
Okay, let's voracious social media user. I like that. Now, guys, we often use the word voracious with words like reader. We also use it a lot with eater. So, for example, are you a voracious eater? Well, maybe if you have boys, right? Anybody have teenage boys here? Carlos, you were a teenager once. Were you a voracious eater? More or less.
Two
Yeah.
teenage boys, and they're crazy. They eat so much.
So Stephanie, what would be an example of like what's a typical meal for these teenage kids?
Oh my god, something with like meat. They love like chicken wings, And I don't know, like then ice cream, like they mix so much together. It's disgusting.
So do they have like hamburger and chicken wings
Hamburger
and
and yeah, chicken wings, ice cream, chocolate milk.
oh
It's
my goodness.
yeah.
That's pretty
Mhm.
well, okay, I have to be honest, I was like that too. So
Yeah. It's so crazy.
yeah, so unfortunately, teenage boys, we get to be voracious eaters in this case.
For sure.
Okay. But guys, if you notice that those are common collocations, voracious reader, voracious eater. I agree with Saba. I think now we're going to have to say voracious social media user. I mean, yeah, I mean, some people just eat it. Like, again, the idea is like they're eating social media. They use it so much. Okay. Now, guys, our time is getting a little short, so I'm just going to go through the next two very quickly. So for example, in the next example here, we have immortalized. So if you notice here, immortalized is basically collocating with Harry Byrne and Febb. So these two people are immortalized. So there's our word. And they're immortalized. Notice that the immediate collocation is you're immortalized in. And specifically, we often immortalized with statues. So for example, we often put famous people into statues. By the way, does anyone know what immortalized means?
Never be forgetting sometimes of
Yeah, so basically immortalized means to be remembered forever. Yeah, that's the idea, to be remembered forever. So Tasi, do you want to be immortalized? Should we make a statue for you?
yeah. No.
No?
No.
The Tasi statue? Okay. Some people do. Some people want to be remembered forever. I'd like to be remembered for a little while, at least. Okay, so we're immortalized in statues. Can someone give me one more example of how we immortalize people? What are some
Uh,
other ways?
I think giving the name of road.
Oh, that's a good one. Yes,
Yeah.
or a park.
Yeah.
Okay.
A park, yeah.
Okay. Statue, immortalized with the name of a park. Okay. Park Road. Okay, that's good. Yeah, so we name highways, for example. Okay, and then the last one is enfranchised. Everyone, if you want to say that word, you can just say it. Carlos mentioned paintings. That's another good one. Everyone, say that word, enfranchised. Just say it there at your computer, enfranchised. Now, in one of my groups last 2 weeks ago, someone noticed that franchise is, for example, like McDonald's. You know, McDonald's is a franchise. You find many McDonald's, you know, many Subway sandwich shops. That is not the exact meaning of this word here. To enfranchise someone means to give them power, to give them rights. So in this case, if you'll notice the collocation here is to enfranchise millions of women, right? So that's the first collocation, millions of women. To give this particular power. And the question here for the group is, what power were they given? Yeah, basically that vote. The vote to give them the power of suffrage. So again, you'll notice that we frequently use the word franchise with the word voting. Guys, so again, after class, just go to Google, type in franchise, and you will notice that many of the articles or stories are talking about voting, because that's where political power is for the people. That's the power we have as citizens, is that idea. So again, that word enfranchise basically means, you know, you don't just enfranchise one person. You're giving this to lots and lots of people. Okay, so yes, it's kind of a situation here that is a very, still it's a debate today, guys. For example, people who were in prison here in the United States, when they get out of prison, some states take away their right to vote when they become, if they were in prison. So what's happening in some of the states, Kentucky is actually one example where they're trying to enfranchise these these former criminals, because they believe, some people believe that after you served in prison, you need to, come back and have your rights, restored. So in this case, we still see the word enfranchise today, but maybe not so much for the suffragists, but for other groups. Again, maybe like people who were in prison. Okay, now guys, I mentioned we're going to need a piece of paper, or maybe we don't necessarily need a piece of paper. But let me go back for just a moment. So we're going to go just a few minutes extra here, if you don't mind. let's go back and talk about hinged. Hinged on. Okay, so I'm going to read this real quickly, and then you don't, if you don't want to write it on a piece of paper, that's fine, but you can write it in the chat box, and that's what I really want to do is our final step here. So in this example, what we learned is that an important event hinged on the decision of another person. So if you can recognize the meaning here, the word hinged on is basically similar to depended on. Something depended on something else. So this final step depended on the decision of someone else. Okay? So if you'll notice in my explanation here at the bottom, often events hinge on other things happening first. So again, the idea here of convincing someone to vote, that the ability to get the right to vote hinged on the decision of this person. Now, for example, maybe you were going to be busy today and you couldn't come to class. Your attendance today hinged on what happened with your other commitment. So, for example, if you're here today, maybe that's because your other commitment was canceled, or maybe you could move it to a different day. Now, here's what I want us to do to finish up here this morning. So, again, if you want to write it first on a piece of paper, that's fine, or if you want to put it in the chat box, I would like for you to make a sentence using hinge on or hinged on. So if you notice my question, it says, what other important things in your life hinged on other things happening first? Okay, so that's what I'd like for us to do here before we leave this morning. So if you want to take a moment and write it down on a piece of paper, that's fine. If you just want to put an example in the chat box, I'll put an example too for my own personal life. Okay, so Tasha, we want to use a full sentence. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So this was my example. So moving to this area, moving to Northern Kentucky, hinged on my finding a job. So we actually looked for a job first, we found it, and then we moved here. So moving here hinged on finding a job first in this area. Okay, so guys, let's do that now. So try to make a sentence and put it in the chat box. Okay, so Rena, you have it backwards. So try it again. Okay, good, Carlos. In fact, I would probably use it in the present tense. Okay, there you go, Risa. Okay, that's a good example. Hinged on your boys. Okay. Now, do you mean, Risa, do you mean like your boys' activities, boys' school, perhaps?
A boys' school and the homework.
Okay, so maybe we can say taking time to study hinged on my boys' school.
Boys' school. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, something like that. Okay. Okay. So yeah, Carlos, Carlos, we need to use that one in the present or the future, since that's the future, right? So maybe Carlos, you can say will hinge on. Okay. All right. So Rena, can you try your sentence again in the chat box there? Okay. All right. So Julie, I think we got it backwards. So Julie, we might want to say it like this: my life will hinge on making money. So my life will depend on making money. Yeah. I think that's probably true for a lot of people. All right, so Fatima, my church, my country hinges on the pandemic situation. Okay, good, Fatima. Again, we probably want to keep it in the present or the future. So maybe hinges on or will hinge on. Okay. All right, there you go, Rena. Okay, good, Yuka. There you go. Okay, good. There we go. Okay. All right, anybody else? Anybody else want to try it? Okay. Okay. Okay, good. There you go. Okay. Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls. Okay, hinges on the weather. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so maybe Saba, we can say traveling to Niagara Falls will hinge on the weather. Okay. Okay, your attendance today hinged on your daughter needing her for online classes. Okay, good. There you go, Brenda. All right, so sunny, traveling to hinge on the weather. Okay. Yeah, so again, sunny, notice we want to use traveling to Yellowstone. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to type this. Okay. Okay, good, good. Yeah, I mean, so if you notice, guys, weather is always something we cannot control, right? Okay. All right. I think everybody, just about everybody's given an example, and I think you're starting to understand it. So if you notice, something hinges on something else, which means my part is probably going to depend on something that maybe I cannot control. You know, Brenda mentioned her kid situation. Same thing with Risa. We often cannot control those things. Maybe you could say, for example, driving to this place hinges on my car being fixed. You know, maybe your car is being repaired. You can't control that. So your part of it hinges on this situation. So there we go. Now we're starting to get the basic idea. Okay, well, guys, sorry we went a few minutes long here, but again, I wanted to use this as an example, this exercise, to show you, again, thinking about how co-locations work, and of course, how to use them. All right, so guys, that's going to be our next step here today. So I'm going to return to our presentation to finish up here real quickly. Okay, so for next week, here's what's going to happen. So I'm going to take some co-locations that we identified here in class today. And just like we did with the hinge on example, I want you to make a sentence using these co-locations. So after class, probably this evening, I'll have the activity ready. It'll just be a few examples that I want you to make a sentence using those co-locations, okay? Now, everybody, you got to promise, okay, so raise your right hand. You have to promise that you're not going to cheat, right, and look on the internet to find your examples. Okay, so Mr. John, I promise. Just try it. Okay, the idea here is we're trying to learn how to use these new expressions, but that's the important thing. We understand how co-locations work. That's one thing, but now we want to learn how to use them, and we want to use them in our everyday life. That's what learning words is about. It's about learning them and then using them. Okay, so I hope we get a chance to do that. So I'm going to share that. Okay.